Hey, when you've experienced anxiety in the past, perhaps if and when, what kind of leader did you want or need? That's the question we're coming around today. Again, if and when, I'm assuming when, because we all experience anxiety at some point.
It's a human emotion.
It's a human emotion, right?
Yep.
What kind of leader did you want or need? Did you have that leader?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the question. We're talking about anxiety today, leading others with it, leading if we have it. So we hope to give you some good insights. We're not doctors
No.
or therapists
No.
or any of that nature, but we both have been working in leadership
And coaching people with anxiety
and experiencing
for
anxious
years.
feelings ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, we have stories we'll tell. I mean,
For sure.
yeah, just to jump in on that note, I used to be a youth pastor. I served in a couple of churches. Both were absolute terrible experiences. I will say not completely to the fault of the churches I served in. I certainly contributed. I was young, idiot, foolish. But I will say that the weight of the blame I will put on them. But I left that with a lot of anxiousness, a lot of anxiety, where I just didn't trust people and kind of developed this social anxiety disorder. I just couldn't be around large groups of people for very long without some sort of panic attack. I remember even one event at my current church. It was 18, 19 years ago. We walked into a dinner and it was a crowded room. I said, okay, I can do this. And not 5 minutes later going, I can't do this, honey. Time to go. Time to go home. So just growing through that, I'm fine now. I'm very comfortable going into our potluck dinners and sitting down among a group of people, a large group, and doing well. But the sheer terror I felt, it was just a hard emotion to work through at times. And it's real. Even going back when I was a kid, my mom wanted me to take swimming lessons, learn how to swim. So she called the local YMCA and asked about swimming lessons, and she got the dates and times, signed me up, and I went into my first lesson, put on my bathing suit, went out to the pool, and just wave of nauseous. Lightheaded, about to throw up. I went up to the instructor and said, I think I'm gonna throw up. He goes, okay, go throw up and come back. It's kind of heartless. But I tell you, and that's not a prescription, by the way, but for me in that moment, it was the right thing to do because I came back and I worked through the emotion. I got in the pool. I did the lesson, and I had an absolute blast, which led to my mom, okay, yeah, I'll take you to the local beaches and swimming holes now during the summer when it's hot, and was playing with my friends. And because I was pushed through it, I was able to enjoy so much more on the other side of it. But man, pushing through it, it's really, really hard at times.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I never really had or thought given anxiety even a forethought, right? Until I was an adult. Actually, until fairly recently, when I say fairly recently, within the last 10 years, I remember being on. I think I mentioned this before, but part of my job was leading missions trips. And I remember the last one that I went on. Prior to that, I'd had some health issues, and experiencing those health issues, and then thinking about the trip, didn't connect what was actually going on. So on one of those last trips, I felt these health issues starting to rear their ugly head. And that led to a lot of emotions of anxiousness, of anxiety, and thinking through, looking back, up until very recently, I had to change my perspective on this. Like I don't think I have an anxiety disorder by any means, but I think I was triggered by the health. And so then all of a sudden I have these anxious feelings. And so now when I travel, I'm aware of that. And so I can do a lot better in controlling those feelings.
Yeah.
And so that was, but for me, I never knew what anxious feeling was, as far as I knew what nervous excitement was or being excited was. I knew what being really nervous was, but anxiety, you know, was something totally different for me that I never knew I would ever experience. But it also, I think, was in retrospect a good thing. Not that I'm, you know, super happy about, you know, health issues and things like that, but it opened my eyes to just a little bit to give me just a dose of what other people that I rub elbows with in my family or that I'm leading as a leader. Man, if you experience what I experienced, but more of it and more often, wow. Like, I don't know how you are functioning, right? So,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about, you know, we're going to talk about our personal perspective on anxiety. We'll talk about our personal beliefs on it, our personal experiences with it. But again, at the end of the day, we're not doctors, we're not therapists. So
We are
we're
not
gonna,
professionals, but we have experience leading
Exactly.
others who have anxiety, and sometimes leaders ourselves. We have anxiety.
Right.
We're going to talk about that as well in a moment.
yeah, a little honest episode coming at you.
We can only speak to what worked for us and what we've seen. So please take that and keep that in mind. Grain of salt, please, as we continue our leadership journey and learn and grow and how to be better leaders for those who have anxiety and experience it.
Right.
So
Right.
just a little disclosure: as Jared and I were getting ready for this episode, we did some research. We took some time. We came across a Forbes article on anxiety that has some interesting pieces of information we wanted to share with you.
Yeah, this I think what is perception.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, the way I look at it is the way the world, our culture here in North America is looking at this high rise of anxiety in our younger generations. And maybe you're one of those younger generations and you know exactly what we're talking about because you experience this anxiety. So this is just some collected data that they put together on what's going on for our younger people.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I don't even know what to think sometimes of this data. Do I even agree with it? I mean, this is kind of a take it or leave it. Hey, here's the perception of anxiety in our culture.
And we'll talk about that.
And then we'll talk about that after.
So here are some of the pieces of information that stood out to us. One, anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States and affected over 40 million adults, or basically 19.1% of the population in the U.S. That's quite a lot. And what they're calling is GAD, G-A-D, generalized anxiety disorder, is the most common anxiety disorder in the U.S., with 6.8 million adults affected. Three more. Young people are more likely to experience symptoms of anxiety than older adults, nearly 50%. Between those ages 18 and 24 reporting depressive disorder or anxiety symptoms. Excuse me. Women are more than twice as likely as men to experience anxiety. And finally, anxiety disorders are often very treatable, but more than 60% of people don't seek treatment for it. So
that comes from, again, Forbes.
Forbes magazine, the author Jessica Booth, who does medical articles for Forbes and other media outlets as well. There's one quote from the article we'll read to you as well. And in it, she's writing, some experts believe that anxiety is so common in the U.S. today because of how much information we receive on a daily basis. Now, in the article, she's quoting Justine Carino. Excuse me. Yeah. Thank you. Justine Carino, a therapist and founder of Carino Mental Health Services. And this is a quote from Justine. We are having trouble understanding what we need to react to and what information we can let go of. This is one of the reasons why here in the U.S., right, she thinks there's so many people dealing with this anxiety. So, let's take a moment and talk about Bill and Jared and what we're thinking and our thoughts in general. And again, this is just our opinion. So, grain of salt as we share this information.
Yeah, and we want to share as gracefully and compassionately as we can, because this isn't our field, and we want to readily admit that. But I have a lot of experience working with people who have what they would describe as clinical, anxiety disorders, all the way down to people like myself who have it in certain situations, and people in between. And so what I've come to, I think, understand and even believe about anxiety is yes, there is definitely the anxiety disorders such as, that would require, someone like a professional, a doctor, therapist and whatnot, to kind of figure out are there chemical imbalances. I mean, that's a real thing.
And we don't
mental
take
health.
anything away from that if that's what your experience
No,
is.
not at all.
You have our hopes and our prayers if that's what
Right.
you're walking through. So.
Yeah, exactly. However, on the flip side of that, I really think and believe that a lot of what our younger generation is experiencing would fall into the category of anxious feelings. And what I mean by that is I have multiple students who will say, my anxiety. And I'm left kind of scratching my head thinking, what you've just explained to me was feelings of anxiousness, right? And which everyone has. But I think what's happening is because whatever the reason being, we can talk about the reason, but the reason we're seeing this, we kind of coined it the anxiety pandemic, for good or for bad.
Yep.
I think it's because a lot of young people are self-diagnosing. Yep. And I think that it's heartbreaking to see and to think that, the younger generations really aren't being, and we'll talk about this a little more, but they're really not being challenged to work through their emotions, or they're looking at a feeling of anxiousness as a bad thing when that's a healthy emotion that can lead to some really good outcomes if we learn how to navigate it.
Yeah.
It's an emotion that our body, kind of produces and gives us. And, I think if we're able to help young people understand, what that is and how to walk through it. I'm doing this with family and friends and students.
Yeah.
And so that for me is, and I don't claim to know where that line is or or even how to decipher where the line is between someone, who has an actual clinical disorder, meaning, maybe a chemical imbalance or whatever that looks like, and then somebody who is in the realm of just struggling with some anxious feelings. So I think there's definitely a difference, and I believe that we're quick to diagnose as a culture, and we're quick to self-diagnose.
Yeah, I asked myself the question of, hey, can I live my life without feeling anxious at all?
Yeah, no.
And I had to say no. And I think we all face opportunities or moments where we feel this anxiousness. And, like me, my example of going to the swimming lesson, that was certainly a moment of anxiousness, but I wouldn't have personally go, hey, I need to go see a therapist or a doctor for this feeling, this moment of anxiousness.
Right.
I think there's an opportunity to help change our mindset around anxiousness. I agree with Jared. I think there's a lot of quick to diagnose because it's such a plethora of people experiencing it now. We're quickly diagnosing it as a disorder versus just it's a healthy emotion that we need to, and I do say the word healthy intentionally, right? And we're going to get into why that may be in a moment, that we experience and need to work through and learn how to navigate. So again, we're not experts. We know there's this big hodgepodge of conversation around the word anxiety and people feeling anxiety. And if you are one of those people, first and foremost, let us know we care about you. We hope that you can navigate and work through that. If it's a clinical issue that you're working through, you will be in our prayers. We're really hoping the best for you to move through it, that becomes something that's not a day in and day out thing for you that you have to deal with. Yeah. But we do have some tips about being a leader, leading people who struggle with anxiety, whether it's clinical or just anxious moments of life that we experience. Right. And anxiety, let's be clear, anxiety comes from this gap of moving from the unknown to the known. And just sitting in that gap, oh my gosh, what if, how do I, when this might happen, that might happen, this might happen. And it's navigating our emotions as we move through that gap until what was unknown becomes known and becomes a little more familiar for us.
Right. Yeah, so I'm going to give just a few thoughts on that, kind of helping others, leading others who may be experiencing, again, it could be a full-fledged type of disorder, or it could just be anxious moments of life. And then we're going to actually transition into how to lead with anxiety. And that's when you're going to kind of get a few more of our own personal disclosures, maybe a couple stories, and also some really good thoughts from some other well-known leaders who have a little more knowledge in this than we do.
Yeah.
And that's going to kind of serve to be a catalyst for, a foundation for kind of how Bill and Jared think as well. So, but let's start with, again, we're going to try to help lead someone who's anxious or has anxiety, however you want to phrase that and look at that, and we'll talk more about that later. But assuming you're starting with a strong connection, like Bill and I have already talked about in previous episodes, you have a good, strong connection with those you're leading, assuming that. If you don't, go
Connect
get that first.
before you correct. Right.
If you don't, go connect, right? And then come back to this episode. But assuming we're picking up, you have a great connection with those you're leading. We believe maybe the first step could be, or should be, compassion and empathy. The question, the simple question, when you've had anxiety, what kind of leader did you want? You're now that leader, right? So compassion and empathy, I think, are the two things that come to my mind straight away. Because whether you have a person who is super anxious and it's just a moment because they have a big, test coming up, or they've got, something happened in their life, and now they have these, like for me, the whole issue of traveling and then health, and now I'm thinking to myself, I'm about to jump on a plane, am I going to have a kidney stone? Like, you just have these feelings, right? And so if they're like me, where they're kind of trying to learn through these brand new feelings and like, why can't I calm my body down and those types of things, or whether it's somebody who is, full-fledged, compassion and empathy are always a good step number one.
Always. I even recently had a conversation with a leader this week, just yesterday, the day before we were recording this, about dealing with employees he has, that so many of them dealing with anxiety. And he's from an older generation, like myself, but he's a little bit more of a get to the point, get over it, move forward, put on your big boy, big girl pants, and just get it done. What's the problem? And my counsel to him was, that's not going to work in today's society. Really, we need to be starting with the leverage of empathy. As leaders, we're about people. That's our job, is caring for, coaching, helping people navigate through experience, events, projects, work, responsibilities at work, volunteering in the nonprofit organization, motivating, which is another episode, motivating volunteers versus motivating paid employees.
Right, two different things.
Different things, and how to do both really well when they have anxiety. And I said, you really got to start from where they are, because where you stand all depends on where you sit. Right. And if their thoughts are on this anxious moments that are coming and going all the time, that's where we start. That's where they're sitting. Yeah. And starting with compassion, I mean, can you imagine, maybe that's you. Maybe you're just kind of a direct to the point, get over it, suck it up, move forward. Maybe that's your perception. But can you put yourself in someone else's shoes who's experiencing on a regular basis this sense of heightened tension, emptiness, void, fear, unknown, just this kind of tenseness throughout their muscles about what's coming and what may be next and what might not be next. So the best place to start, with this people is compassion, care.
Yeah, and I would say too, quickly on this whole idea of compassion, empathy, is if you go back up a couple of generations, like my parents, they were, very much get over it, rub some dirt on it, you're fine, right? And I believe in a way that is very much still needed. I don't want to throw that out. Like leading strong and heavy is a good thing, but I also think the pendulum has swung way too far the other direction. I think the generation under mine has gone so far the other way, and we could talk about participation trophies and things like that. That I think take away the hard work of the team that won, and that's another episode. But I think we need to balance these things.
Yes.
And so but always, you can be compassionate and still rub some dirt on it. You can be that leader.
Yes. We're not, we're going to come to this, and maybe I'm jumping the gun.
That's
but
okay.
Care and candor, right?
Yeah.
Great leaders need to have both. Just because we're suggesting you lead into the care first doesn't mean we're saying hold back on the candor, make it softer. We do not mean that at all. And we're going to talk about that.
We're going to talk about that in just a minute. I mean,
Yeah.
but because we're going to work right to that. Yeah. So compassion, empathy. I think the next thing is investigation. And what I mean by that is it's going to be a limited investigation. It's not going to be like, we got to figure out and diagnose what's going on with you, whether it's clinical or whether that's not your job, right? As a leader, and unless you are, coming on here and you're a doctor or you're a therapist, like that is your, that is part of your job. But for most of us leading in the spheres, that's not, right? And so, but there's no reason why compassion, empathy can't flow into investigation just a little bit, asking some questions, trying to get an idea of, where they're coming from, and try and peel back a layer or two. And I know you had a couple thoughts on this.
Yeah,
Bill.
just what's the impact? How is this impacting you? All right. Okay, now how is that impacting you in performing this role that we have you in at the moment? Paid, unpaid, whatever that is. And then how can I help you navigate that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what we mean by investigation, is to the point you're a leader, you're overseeing people in the organization you're in, and you have a task to perform. You need to move the ball down the field, and these are the players you're working with. And how can you come alongside these players to move through this journey to accomplish what you need to accomplish in the organization?
Yeah, and it may be that investigation leads you to sideline a couple of players, and that's not a bad thing. Sometimes you have someone in the game who gets a little injured, right, and they need to step out. You're going to use your HR. You're going to use your resources, which we'll talk about. You got an injured player who they need to get out and get better and then come back. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is our job to investigate enough to know, is this one of those situations?
That's right.
And what do I do? And what do I do?
And I've without going into any detail, I've coached employees through that, where they've had to step away for a leave of absence.
I've done the same. Yep.
Take care of themselves, mental fitness, mental health wise.
Get through some things.
And take through some things and then come back and pick up where they left off. So,
and I think so. Compassion, empathy, leading to a little bit of investigation. I think the next step we wanted to give you is encouragement, because this for me flows back to attitude reflects leadership, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you're leading. No. If you've got a person experiencing some anxious feelings, right, which are, again, we kind of know that sometimes that's a really healthy thing, or whether it's somebody who really has, a disorder, chemical imbalance, whatever that might look like, they're going to pick up on your attitude. So if you're negative when you're trying to lead them, they're going to continue to be negative. Yeah. But if you're positive, right, and you're encouraging them and you're, man, I'm so sorry you're going through that, and you come at it with a smile and encouragement, empathy, compassion, encouragement, I think, would be the next step.
Yeah. Are you coming across to them as they're just a number I need to get in line, or you're a problem I have to deal with, or man, I got to meet with you and then I got 10 other things I got to deal with? We're still leaders of people, and we got to treat people as people, and that value should never diminish from our leadership. We are here about raising people up to where they haven't been before. Right.
And I think this leads us right to, you got compassion, you've got investigation, you've got then encouragement. And this next one is kind of what I mean by flipping that pendulum back into balance a little bit, where we as leaders need to hold the line, right? So at the end of the day, right, good leaders will hold themselves and those they lead to the same standards. So yes, we start with compassion. Yes, we investigate. Yeah. Yes, we encourage. But at the end of the day, hey, we have to rub some dirt on this and get through this, right? You got to hold everyone to the same standards.
That's right. If you're in this organization, this is the level of performance we need. This is what we were paying you to do. I still got to hold you to this. I care about you. I'm concerned for you. I'll do what I can to help you. I'll give you the resources from our people team, counseling, so forth. Leaves of absences, whatever that may look like for your organization. But in the end, in this role, this is the level of performance we need from you to consider this successful. And the question becomes, can they actually do that or not? And that's what you help them work through.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, Bill, what about what about this next step, right? We've talked about helping others, maybe some encouragement through leading others who have this. What about ourselves? What if we're the ones experiencing? Let me ask that question again. So,
Well, no, let's just,
Okay.
we'll pick it up. Sorry for the interruption. We have pets and I have dogs, and he started to chew his bone right underneath our table here. I was afraid it was coming across on the mic. So sorry for the edit. But yeah, ask that question again now. What are we dealing with?
So we're moving from helping others, leading others through, who experience anxiety or have anxiety. Now we're talking about, what about if it's us? What if we're the ones?
Right.
What do we do? How do we lead?
So it's learning to, I think, leverage and benefit from anxiety. We mentioned this before, and this comes from an interview Simon Sinek did, and again, I'll add the link to the show notes. He interviewed Dr. Tracy Dennis Tawari. I'm not even sure I'm...
Tawari?
Tawari. I'm not sure I'm
So
pronouncing...
sorry, Tracy, if you're seeing this and we're butchering that.
Sorry, Dr. Tracy. But she actually has a book out called Future Tense, Why Anxiety is Good for You, Even Though It Feels Bad.
And this is the part of the episode where we're not necessarily flipping the script, but this is kind of our thoughts as well.
Yeah.
When we read this, we're like, man, somebody said it so much better, so much more elegant
We
than
wrote
we
down
did.
these notes
Right.
and these thoughts about anxiety.
But they
and
just sounded better, right?
We
Yeah.
stumbled across this, and she said exactly what we wrote down. So, which is, encouraging when you realize.
And she did it with a lot of grace and a lot of compassion. And
Absolutely.
So I was so grateful for
And
that.
again, she positioned a lot.
I have
better.
not read the book, but we did.
The
we did
interview
hear
she
her,
did with
yeah.
Simon was really amazing. We were both
Very
impressed.
encouraged. Very encouraged,
impressed.
yeah.
Yeah. So let me give you a word picture. Let's start here, and I think this is the best way to look at this. Is we mentioned earlier, Jared and I go to the gym. And if you go to the gym, or have gone out for a run or tried to work out, you may have experienced the next day where all the muscles, you're just, I can't move. It just hurts. It hurts too much. I can't move.
Right.
Oh, I'm never going to the gym again.
Right.
But the reality is going to the gym is healthy, and I'll attest to that. After having gone to the gym for a couple of weeks, we went and visited my son in Virginia, lives in a very hilly area, and he took us for a walk around the city, up and down hills, and I'm
Some
going,
hills.
man, I'm doing pretty good navigating all these hills.
You'll notice the growth.
You notice the growth and the benefit, even though the short term was stiff, pain, ouch, but there's results
Right.
after making this consistency. So it's about, is this really a mental health issue? Is this a disorder issue? Or is this kind of like fitness, where this is not comfortable? This is not fun. I don't like feeling this sore after a workout. But after working through it, I'll go back to my story of, learning to swim. I lost count the number of times I've gone swimming since I learned to swim, and I wouldn't have learned to swim if I haven't, I hadn't that instructor say, okay, go throw up and come back. We're still going to do your lesson, kind of thing.
Yep.
I have been, water skiing and on boats and swimming in the ocean and on lakes in the Midwest, on the East Coast, down south, up north. None of those would have happened. None of those fun times would have happened if I hadn't pushed through that moment of anxiety as a kid.
Yeah, and I think that is to Dr. Tracy's point when she said, this is kind of an issue of anxiety, the disorder, versus anxiety, the emotion.
Exactly.
Right? So
Exactly.
again, trying to decipher a little bit, what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And for you and for the swimming and all of that, really it was an emotion at that time.
That's right.
And again, for me, back to the, some of my family and students, a lot of them, it's just simply emotions that are healthy and they're so good for you, but it's learning how to step into them
fun emotions.
and exercise them a little bit and learn from them, right? And then grow, right? So I think that's important to call out. But
yeah, so, and Dr. Tracy also calls out that it is deep connection, relationships with deep connections that help us move through these emotions of anxiety. We have those deep partnerships. We can talk and share our feelings and work through and vent a little bit. And it's those that help us move through these emotions of anxiety. But anxiety prevents us from reaching and developing those deep connections.
In a lot of ways, yeah. In a lot of senses,
ways.
yeah.
I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why our younger generations are currently experiencing a heightened level of anxiety emotions. And it's a whole hodgepodge, right? It's technology, it's TikTok, flipping, it's the endorphins from that, it's the attention span, it's the advancements of technology, it's attention span, it's a whole host of things. Taking online relationships and equate them to the depth of personal relationships.
There's a whole host of them.
There's a whole host, and I'm not saying online relationships aren't valid, but there's a greater depth that can come from in-person relationships. Otherwise, it really is, and I'll say this and I'll stop. The online aspect of a relationship should be used to reinforce the existing relationship. It shouldn't be where we get our relationships primarily.
Yeah, and I think too, from being in a leadership position where I work with a lot of young people, a lot of students, a lot of young people.
Myself too, formerly, yeah.
It's one of those things too where I find myself encouraging parents quite often, right? In doing it as a parent myself, trying to limit that screen time, I think is huge. And I think there's studies out there that you can look up. There are definite links to our intake of information and screen time, and how when we're doing that, most of the time we're not exercising our brain, right? And our brain is a muscle, for crying out loud, in many ways. So exercising that and using it. I mean, just the other day we were doing our gardening and we kind of incorporated our kids a little bit to help us. And, it was just being outside, being in nature, getting your hands dirty, getting the mulch and, raking out the old mulch and planting plants and things. And it's just, I forget how much it's so good for the soul, the mind, just to be outside in the sun, in the dirt.
Disconnect.
And so if you're a person who kind of shrinks into themselves, even as a leader, all your downtime is just screen time, or, I would suggest, like I do my students and my parents to help their kids with, is find some hobbies that don't include screens.
Yeah.
And that, not that that's a cure-all, but
yeah. So if you're a leader that you experience, again, if you experience anxiety, right, as an emotion, as a human being, if you have a disorder, that's something else. We would encourage you to get and seek professional help if you haven't yet. But if you're in the category of where, okay, I'm feeling a lot more anxiety, even if it's above average, I guess, than previous generations, maybe one way to word it.
Yeah.
Think of it not as mental health, but mental fitness, right?
Yeah.
It's something that needs to be worked on a regular basis. Right?
For sure.
It's not something that's one and done.
Yeah.
It's impossible to live a life without any anxiety whatsoever. So learning how to navigate with this emotion of anxiety is going to be very key to your success, your personal growth, and also your growth as a leader as well. So we'd even encourage you we haven't read it, but we love the interview with Dr. Tracy. Check out her book. It's called Future Tense, Why Anxiety is Good for You, Even Though It Feels Bad.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Sure. And I would say too, just by way of another disclosure here, as a leader, sometimes we need to really lean into our resources. So like for me, I have, a short list of counselors, therapists in our area that, if I feel, man, this is something that, you really need to sit down and talk to someone who has been educated in a professional in this area, then I'll use those resources, right? So don't be afraid to do that. If your business has an HR, human resources for a reason,
absolutely,
don't be afraid to use those. Sometimes it's just out of your realm, and we totally understand that as leaders. We've been there. Hey, this is just not something I'm capable of handling, right? It's above my pay grade, or out of my realm of knowledge is probably a better thing to say than out of my pay grade.
Yeah.
But out of my realm of knowledge, that's okay. Don't feel bad about that at all.
Yeah.
And I think this just kind of brings us full circle back to this idea of care and candor.
Yeah. Again, great leaders need to have both care and candor. If you only have care, then you're not doing your business, your organization justice by trying to accomplish and moving the ball down the field of what needs to be done by the organization. Right. But if all you do is push candor, and you're going to burn bridges, and you're going to lose your staff, your employees, your volunteers. And again, leadership, it's not management, where management is a piece of leadership. Leadership is about people. It's about developing people, growing people, and taking them to places they haven't been to yet.
Right.
Growing them there. So
Absolutely.
care and candor. You're going to hear us mention that again and again on this podcast.
And that goes for self-growth too.
Yeah.
You got to show your self-care, but you got to be candid with yourself as well.
Very much. So.
But yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We hope that this information is helpful for you as it was for us. We know that it was for us. So we're going to make the overall assumption you'll gain something from it. And hopefully we'll see you next time. If you want to drop some comments, we'd love to hear from you and what you're thinking, how you're doing. So it's good.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time. Take care.
We'll see you next time.